Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Managing Changes and Stress in Unpredictable Times. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Beckham, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs that we offer, our contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. There are some logistical items that I'd like to address before we begin. I ask that you please submit your questions throughout the webinar so we can address them during the Q&A portion in the last 5 minutes of this presentation. To submit your questions, select the Q&A button in the bottom middle of the screen. Type your question and press send. Once you select the Q&A button in the bottom middle of your screen, the send button will appear at the bottom of your screen as well. There's also live captioning available for viewing towards the bottom of the screen. We will send an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of the webinar. The link will be sent to the email address you submitted during the registration. I'd like to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Managing Changes and Stress in Unpredictable Times. We are all navigating unusual, unprecedented, and evolving challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic is profoundly affecting our mental and physical health and that of our loved ones. It's impacting the way we conduct work, if we are fortunate to still be in a job, and the way we live our daily lives, with many of us in all family stay-at-home circumstances. We are, of course, in this together, and we are all responding in our distinctive ways, which may at times clash with how our family members or our colleagues deal with the same circumstances. It is a privilege to introduce Caroline Moores. Caroline Moores is an organizational consultant, speaker, and a leadership and team coach from the Netherlands, with 30 years of experience in Europe and the United States. She focuses on candor, accountability, and change. It's an honor to welcome Caroline. Caroline, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa, for the very on point and kind introduction. And please, good afternoon, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to you. I'm extremely honored and excited to be talking about something that is so prevalent these days. It's a lot of unpredictability, uncertainty, many changes that some, or maybe even most of them, come with stress. So I'm honored and excited. But please let me start by expressing three kinds of thanks. And first of all, I want to thank you all who are still dialing in great numbers. I think you deserve an applause because you are in these crazy, unusual times taking time for professional development. I think that's awesome. And maybe you are on the call right now while you are feeling Zoom fatigue or whatever other medium you use, whether it's Skype, GoToMeeting, FaceTime fatigue, and it's a real thing. And maybe you're sitting listening to me here while you just ignored your child for the third time, army crawling on the floor, getting their headphones from the table in your room, or whatever crazy circumstances or funny circumstances. It may be that you just had to battle your way into the best available room in your apartment or your house. And maybe that is already for the third time today. So thank you for all of you for being here with me today. A second huge thank you to the team of the College of Continuing and Professional Studies. You are an awesome team. So thank you for putting this series Adapt and Thrive in Changing Times on, and for being able to so quickly adapt to the new situation with everything going virtual. And third, I'd like to say a tremendous thank you to all of you who are on this webinar right now, or maybe your family members or best friends who are working in transportation, gas stations, agriculture, the food supply chain, the energy sector, pharmacies, nursing homes, healthcare, police and fire departments, mass transit, airport workers, mortuary and funeral services. Who else can we think of? The military, water and wastewater, the news media, janitorial services, trash collection, animal shelters. Oh gosh, I mean, there is no end to it. The food banks, the shipping services, charities. I'm sure I missed many people who are out there every single day and do not have the luxury that at least I have, which is still continuing my work from home. So for everyone who is out there and taking risks and caring for all of us, I really thank you for that. So with that, let's see what the objectives for today are. And of course, Lisa already gave you the context for this webinar, right? 3 objectives. One is a even better understanding than you already may have of your and others' responses to these unexpected changes and uncertainties. And please let me be clear. Some of you, this is a huge group of people. Some of you may be completely happy with and expecting this webinar to be completely focused on COVID-19 related uncertainties and stress. Some of you may see this as a flight from the COVID-19 discussions and tips and worries, or anything in between. I want to be really mindful. This is a large group of people, and yes, we are all in this together. I agree. And yes, I do like the hashtag alone together, but I also want to acknowledge that we're all extremely different, right? We have different personalities, different circumstances, and there is no golden cure, no one objective, no list with 10 tips that will help most or all of you. And you know all this, of course. This is nothing new, but I really want to be mindful that some of what I will share with you and suggest may ring truer to you than some other elements of what I'll share and suggest. And please do know that I acknowledge and respect you as an individual with your very unique circumstances. And I invite you to just distill what is helpful to you. So, objective number 2, more ways to manage your worries, fears, and stress. And I say more ways on purpose, of course, because I know you already have a lot of ways throughout whether you're 30, 40, 50, 60 years of life. You have so much experience, including in dealing with worries, fears, and stress. But I hope and aspire to add some to that. And then third, insight into different ways that you can assist others in managing their stress. So you've already seen the 4 A's of crisis effectiveness. This is my framework that I use for myself and for my many clients, whether they are coaching clients or teams. And it's first, awareness. So this webinar hopefully helps you become even more aware than you already were with your emotional responses, your thought patterns, the way you deal with cramped shelter at home situations, maybe the way you're thinking about and preparing for the whole mental transition in going back to work. What does going back to work mean? What does it look like? What does going back to stores and to restaurants at some point look like? What is it going to feel like? So that mental transition is also one that you would want to be highly aware of. What are my sensations, my sentiments around it, my thoughts? The second A is about accountability, holding yourself accountable, taking ownership for what you own, what you can control, what you can do differently, better, less, more of, especially when it pertains to family dynamics and team dynamics. Hopefully, you are still in a job and you have colleagues, you have a boss. So, what is it that I own in the dynamics that are being created between us? Of course, the third A stands for action. Based on your awareness and what you own, what you hold yourself accountable for, you want to define some actions. There is always one thing that you can do different, that you can do better, or that you can quit doing. So this is action, but action means, especially in unpredictable, uncertain times, the action that's working today may not be working tomorrow because things may be changing fast, or maybe some of your coworkers or some of your family members suddenly are cracking or suddenly gain momentum and feel more optimistic than you do. So adjustments is the fourth A of my 4 A's of crisis effectiveness, if that makes sense. So Before we go into the three sections, I want to remind you of something that has been helpful for my many clients as well as myself. And that is always defining in a certain type of situation what would be a good mindset for dealing, not just with an individual situation, but more with a group, a type of situation. So, what you see here is the change and uncertainty mindset. And again, I want to be mindful of the fact that we're all very different. So, this is an invitation for you to see which of these are helpful to you. Of course, this is based on my 30 years of experience with clients in profits, non-profits in European countries, in the US, and of course, based on my degrees in psychology and my continuing education. But this is not it, right, people? So maybe you've already read it. The willingness to be compassionate with self and others, which makes even more sense when you are forced to stay home most of the time, but also it's a bigger challenge, right? But that's my first one. Willing to experiment without guarantees. And I don't necessarily experiment while taking health risks, of course, but experiment with working from home arrangements. How do I not lose my mind with my kids being at home and running through the house and getting really anxious to be out there and to be meeting with friends, etc. Experiment, but there will not be many guarantees, of course. The willingness to ask and give support as well as grace, which is a little bit connected to being compassionate. Willingness to learn from yesterday. So at the end of the day, you may want to ask yourself, what are 2 or 3 successes? And what is one thing that I want to do differently going forward tomorrow? And this is always a good thing to ask yourself, right? And maybe many of you are already into this habit. If not, I think it's absolutely worthwhile. You can even make that a team or a family question to reflect on. I'm willing to not be in control. Well, that's a hard one for people who like to be in control and who tend to be more on the perfectionistic side. And if our kids would be lined up here, they would be pointing at me now, because that is one thing that defines my makeup, my psychological makeup. And it's perfectly fine to want to be in control of certain things. It's even necessary for us as human beings because we thrive when things are somewhat predictable. But there are also many small and bigger elements of our present situation, of your job situation, that you may not necessarily have to be in control of. And maybe you would like to, but it's maybe just simply not possible right now. And then I'm willing to be vulnerable, to show myself in your beauty and in your misgivings when you're feeling up and when you're feeling down. And so I applaud you for defining your own change and uncertainty mindset. I'd be thrilled if some of these elements become part of your mindset, but it's about you tailoring it to you, your particular personality, your family, your circumstances, your type of job, your industry, etc. Quickly, I give credit for all images to Pixabay where there is no copyright, and images are for free, just so that you know. So the last thing before we go into the first section, I'm willing to say that the only thing that you and I need to do in these very, very unusual circumstances, and only seems a little too simplistic, right? But is doing what we already know we have to do, but do it earlier, do it more, maybe even better. So when it comes to managing stress and changes and unpredictability and uncertainty, it's not that different now in the COVID-19 restriction era and concern and anxiety and worries era, but it's just earlier, more, and better. And of course, there are a couple of things when it comes to online meeting and rearranging work or having to reinvent yourself because you cannot do your work remotely. Of course, those are new elements to this situation, but much of what you already know about stress and change management also applies now. And I'd like to always remind myself, it's not this black and white, but decisions, not conditions, determine your path. And it's not like I said, black and white, but at least both of them. And you may wonder why the black swan is on here. Um, I think this is like a black swan crisis or situation, which is an unpredictable event beyond what's normally expected. I didn't see this coming, other than we had spent some time in Singapore, my husband and I, because we live in both places, both in Minnesota and Singapore. And they obviously had COVID-19 earlier than Europe or the US. But other than that, I didn't see this coming, of course. And so black swan events are extremely rare and they have a severe impact. I think we can all agree to that. So some of the questions that I've heard my clients, friends, and family ask is, how am I going to keep homeschooling and sustain my kids' motivation? Is it even possible to focus on anything right now with all that's going on? I don't know how to stay strong if we don't return to an even remotely normal soon. And then some say, how do I live with others at home whose patterns and lives have been equally disrupted, but who respond so uniquely and so differently to the situation than I do? So these are all questions that there are no perfect answers to, of course, right? But they're important questions to consider and to discuss with each other and to learn best practices from each other. So to just recap, we've all been there, even if it was different. So you've all had to manage stress, change, and uncertainty many times in your life when you moved to a different home, changed jobs, missed a promotion that you were expecting, had a child, lost a loved one, etc. There are so many changes that can cause you stress, which is good stress, but also distress, which is stress that can affect our body and mind gravely. We know it's more important now than ever to do what we already know about stress management, but how do you find the rhythm, the habit, the pattern, the energy? We know most of what we should be doing, but we have to do it earlier, more, and better. So keep that in mind. So part one, understand your own and others' unique responses to unexpected changes and uncertainties. And I cannot highlight this enough, unique. And I'm no different than you. Doesn't matter whether you have a degree in psychology, doesn't matter whether I advise others in stress management, whether I speak about it a lot, when it becomes personal, we generally respond and think autobiographically. And by that I mean we respond with our own experiences, personality, style, preferences, thoughts, etc., as a framework, as a starting point. And that can be, well, let's just call it what it is, dangerous. I was going to look for a different word, but it can be dangerous for sure. So, uncertainties and changes. I think you and I are relatively or really good handlers of change and uncertainty in many, many situations, but usually when things are relatively clear and expected. So maybe having had to merge two teams or get used to the third new supervisor in a year, maybe having to suddenly get used to a adult child moving back in with you because they lost their job. Those are situations that are maybe unexpected, but still they are relatively clear, and we have a playbook for these kind of situations. But the problem and the challenge leads to a solution or an approach and to specifics of how to only in those relatively clear and expected situations. So it's different right now, correct? It turns rather messy when it's not so clear what the problem really is and what the solution really should be. And there is not just one challenge or problem, and there is not just one solution or approach, right? So when it comes to COVID-19, there is, what is the real situation around the contagion and the comorbidity and the age effects, etc.? Your job going virtual, company downsizing, prospect of losing a job, that's messy. And one of my clients, she is a restaurant owner with her twin sister. She told me 2 days ago that it's the uncertainty, not having the perspective of knowing what's going to happen in a month, When is the Dutch government, or for that matter the American government or your local government, going to open up certain establishments and businesses, and with what capacity? That makes it hard to define scenarios. And many of us like to do, whether you realize it or not, whether you use this term or not, we like to think and act in scenarios, plan A, B, C. So there are a couple of other examples on here about messy and uncertain changes. Many organizational changes are like this. There are many, at least a few, right? Let's admit at least a few are maybe messy, unclear, at least for the recipients. The people in the offices, top management may know exactly what's going on, but you have not been part of those discussions. So even, of course, in the organizational setting, we recognize the messiness. But many clients, friends, and family members tell me it's much more the case with COVID-19 pandemic situations. So let's look at responses to change and uncertainty. So what is really important is to realize, again, what is the change? How unexpected was it? How long lasting is it? In what context is it? And I'm not talking about COVID-19 right now, right? So if we translate responses to change and uncertainty to other organizational and life changes, these are a couple of the aspects that define how we think about it, what sentiments we develop, and on that we base our actions and approach. So let's look at some responses. On the left side, before I show you the right side, you will see some that are generally considered positive. And I hope you do recognize some of these, right? Because not all change and uncertainty is bad, of course. And our personality ties into that as well. But most people focus usually on the negative elements of change and uncertainty. And I would just like to highlight these here. And you can read through them yourself. You don't need me to be reading what you see on your screen, of course. But let's just take out leadership behavior. Another client that I'm and have been consulting with and am still today made it really clear that certain people who are not in their organization in functional leadership roles have taken a leadership role based on their personality and based on their drive and also on their desire to add meaning in these hard times. So these are some positive, generally positive sentiments around change and uncertainty. So please, I hope you already did that. Look at which ones you already recognize for yourself in these circumstances and which ones you may think you can activate a little more. And on the right-hand side, you now see what we generally tend to label as more negative sentiments and emotions. I'm not quite sure whether we do ourselves and our psychological process much good when we label them either positive or negative. But look through this one. If I think about friends and family members and clients, I see quite a bit of anxiety right now. I saw a lot of confusion early on. I think loneliness is increasing, and also rumination, call it worry, stress, for some discouragement, but not for all. That is also increasing. And it may sound weird, but some people are telling me, I love it that we're probably getting really close to reopening and finding some new way of getting back to a new workable model to live and to work. Some call it the new normal, which others hate that term, so I'm trying to stay away from that. But there is still that mental transition. One of our daughters who is in Spain, she recently explained that some people are not even that excited. They are excited to go outside soon, but they also feel a little awkward the first time that they're walking outside, or that once a week that they're going to the stores, because they want to keep everyone safe and they've gotten so used to being in their houses or apartments. And I've heard that from more people, excitement as well as a little wariness. So that mental transition, even when it is going to a better, more positive state, don't underestimate how you or maybe your family members may be struggling with that more than you would expect. We cannot expect everyone to be just cheering, right? And I'm not even talking about the concerns about opening up the economy and restoring some of our lives. So when you think of dealing with change, and there are many different models, of course, don't think you signed up for a lot of models. So if I just break it down based on one of the frameworks, three broad strokes of approaches that people take when they have to deal with change. And it depends a little bit on whether it was expected or not, whether it's perceived by you as positive or negative, whether you perceive to be in control or not. So there are, again, all these circumstances. But first, the passive one, where you don't really address too much. You wished and hoped that it's not happening, and you just go about your business. And some people may call this denial, some people may call this not so smart, but there are always circumstances in which it may be helpful, at least for a little while in the beginning, to just go about your business and maybe not pretend that nothing's happening, but also not focusing too much on the change. Another one is reactive, feeling the pressure to make a really fast decision. It's sometimes labeled as a knee-jerk reaction, but when it comes to a crisis and when it comes to an emergency, I don't care whether we call it a knee-jerk reaction or not, because that has a negative connotation, right? In an emergency, we need to make fast decisions. And we have seen that when we don't make fast decisions, that sometimes we do ourselves, our team, the organization, or in this case, huge groups of people a disservice. And sometimes the window for a fast decision and fast action has passed, and we cannot make that up. So the last one, proactive, you're positive and you focus on possibilities, on what you can do, on positive outcomes, and you take action accordingly. Now, how I like to use this framework is I like to reflect for myself, and I suggest you do that too, in which particular situations, and it may be completely COVID-19 unrelated, but you can also relate it to the pandemic, in which parts or situations or sub-situations does it make more sense to have more of the passive, more of the reactive, or more of the proactive approach? Because you can have a combination of these three dealings with changes and uncertainties, right? It's not one or the other, it's not black and white. What we do know, most of us are outcome driven. Most of us want to know the way forward. We want to have a clear path, and preferably it's a path with which we can use yesterday's playbook, but yesterday's playbook, when we apply it to the pandemic, might not work, of course, because we haven't been through anything like this. And many of us are not so comfortable with uncertainty most of the time. And then something else that I know about most of us is that we expect all these elements, economy, finance, relationships, health, etc., to be at least somewhat predictable. And I think they are, but they seem less so these days. And when it comes to economy and employment, that is not a seems, that is a fact, right? So that makes it a little harder. So when we talk about, there we go. When we talk about changes and stress, I don't think I have to tell you what stress is, right? Stress is your response, physical, mental, and emotional, to a real or perceived threat, to challenges that weigh on you. And of course, our brain is heavily involved in stress. I will not turn this into a neuroscience lesson because that's not what you signed up for. But I do want to tell you, if you provide me that pleasure, because I think it's very interesting but also relevant, to tell you a little bit about two almond-shaped parts of your brain. They're called the amygdala. They're relatively small. They're part of the limbic brain. And we also call them our emotional processing center, our primitive fear center. And it responds heavily to stress, and it's supposed to do that. However, it does not distinguish very well between real threats and perceived threats. And the perceived threat could be something that you're making up in your own mind with a maybe a little bit of a gloomy narrative, more gloomy than the circumstances require you to be. And require you to be is, of course, um, a little bit of a strange expression here. But what we do know, when you are under high levels of stress, so I'm not talking about positive stress that pumps you up and gets you ready for a presentation or a job interview, but I'm talking about the distress where you are feeling increasingly nervous, increasingly insecure, or increasingly doubtful, or fill in the blanks. When this fear and anxiety grips you, your amygdala, we know from brilliant neuroscientific research, they start almost freakishly working overtime because they want to keep you and your body safe. So it activates the fight or flight response. And so I'm sure you can imagine and think of a situation where you felt that fight or flight response. And the problem is when our amygdala are working overtime, there is less nutrition and less blood and oxygen going to other parts of the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which is right behind your forehead. And we need that for slowing down, deeper thinking, analyzing, problem solving, and all these cognitive processes that help us look at a situation maybe a little more smartly and mindfully. That's hard when the amygdala are working overtime. So you've maybe already read a couple of the most important responses, or I should say results of sustained stress and how that impacts the brain as well as the body. So the lowered physical resistance, that is a bodily response, of course, which increases all kinds of illnesses, either contracting them or if you have contracted them, showing stronger, more severe symptoms. And of course, you see the high cholesterol, the heart issues. We are very familiar with that. Elevated cortisol levels, you've heard of this many times before, but we need to keep reminding ourselves that it impacts memory, retrieval from memory, concentration and focus, the quality of our sleep, not the length, because that's within your control most of the time, depending on your job and maybe your kids and some other circumstances, of course. Then something that a lot of people don't realize is that continued and heavy stress leads to a progressive deterioration of brain function. And there are several things that we still don't know, but what neuroscientists think they know as of today is that it shrinks the prefrontal cortex and it increases the size of the amygdala, which makes sense in a way from a survival perspective, because if we are under prolonged increased stress, the amygdala are getting a lot of energy, are getting a lot of nutrition, they are used a lot, so it makes sense that they would be increased. But it also may have a negative side effect because we may now be perceiving many more things as a threat than we need to. And then reality checks and reason fly out the window. Whether you have a teenager at home, an elderly person that you're working for, an introvert on your team, whereas you describe yourself as an extrovert, there are many differences between personalities and styles. So reality checks don't just fly out the window when there is a lot of prolonged stress, but it certainly is one of the reasons why we experience that. And self-defense mechanisms generally kick in when that happens. And when you're living together longer and more intensely with each other, self-defensiveness is usually only leading to more tension. So we'll talk about that. So some crucial factors to consider when you think about responses to stress and change and uncertainty. And please go through this list and see which ones you may not have considered for a team member that you're still working with virtually, or for a client that you're working with, or maybe for a family member, whether they live with you or not. Look at this list and see whether there is any of these factors that you now decide, since you become more aware, that you want to dive into more, want to consider better, or want to consider differently? Because remember, awareness, accountability, action, and adjustments with colleagues, with family members, friends, clients. And so, with the aggravating circumstances, physical space, we are fortunate to have a home. Some people, maybe I should say many people are not, right? So, what are you fortunate with? What you still do have? And do we focus enough on that? There are people who don't have a home, or they have a small apartment with poor internet and a leaking faucet, maybe no water at all, if I think of certain parts of the country or certain areas. What are financial reserves? For some of us, they are good. For others, very poor, and anything in between. That can be an aggravating circumstance. Well, look through the other ones that I'm mentioning here. And to what extent are we mindful of our own situation and crucial factors to consider, but especially friends, family, and colleagues? So, getting to know loved ones and colleagues. This sounds like maybe a weird title for a slide, right? If I would have been able to see you, some may have looked, some of you may have raised your eyebrows. Well, what do you mean getting to know my loved ones? We don't call them loved ones if we don't know them. Well, people show up differently when under stress. And of course, your loved ones and your colleagues, you've seen them under stress, but not this kind of stress, right? This is for all of us a completely different ball game, a completely different situation. And that's why I keep saying yesterday's playbook may not be working. So remember that we show up differently now than how we used to, but also those people that we interact with, live with, and have to collaborate with. And I'm also willing to say we don't even know ourselves as well as we like to think. We have blind spots. We have idiosyncrasies that have never really shown up in this way because we've never been in this situation. So let's hold ourselves accountable and let's reflect on the way we show up in certain interactions or certain situations. And remember that part of the mindset, be compassionate, and also ask yourself, what is one thing that I can do differently? So a few things that you can do when it comes to getting to know others better. And I know this is going to look like rocket science, so I apologize if it's complicated. 3 elements: ask, listen, and offer. And of course, I was joking, maybe poorly. But people, it is really simple, but not easy. Asking good questions of yourself, but also of others, and really listening. And listening means that you shut up a little longer. Yes, you heard that right, that you postpone your judgment, and that maybe you ask another good question and then you listen some more. And I always love what the Dalai Lama once said. It is, when you talk, you are only repeating what you already know. Isn't that cool? But if you listen, you may learn something new if you really listen. And if you listen based on good questions that you've asked. So, with that, let's go to some example questions. What are some things that I should know about you right now in this situation? And think of these questions you can ask both of colleagues, maybe your boss, maybe a client, as well as family members and friends. I think that first one is a really good question. And how often do we think about asking that, especially if we know the person well? What are some things that are working for you right now in your present situation, whether it is personal or work-wise? And what are some things that are not working for you? That's not to say that you, the person who asked the question, has to solve it all, but it's good to be aware of it. And sometimes when people hear themselves talk about their challenges, they also find different perspectives, maybe even different suggestions, even by hearing themselves talk out loud. Another one that I really like is, what are you noticing about the way that I am handling change and uncertainty, or the way that I am showing up in this new type of collaborating virtually or living together constantly? I think that's a really good question to ask, but please, and I'm sure you realize this, you have to be ready to hear the responses, right? Without that self-defensiveness turning up. Another one could be, what do you consider as positive side effects of your present situation? And this one, if you know that someone right now is in a really discouraged, anxious mood, it may still be a really good question, but I leave that up to your sense of what is appropriate and what is helpful, right? So none of these questions always work. And there is no question on this list that never works, of course. So that is your assessment of what the relationship and the situation and the person require or would benefit from right now. A question that I like to ask, and I can ask much, much more often: what is one thing I can do differently right now to make things better for you? And for all of you who are on this webinar, who are in a supervisory, managerial, or leadership position, there are so many books, workshops, definitions, lists of 10 things to do and 20 things not to do. If you ask me the best definition of leadership, that is helping others be successful. I think the best definition of parenthood and parenting is helping your child become successful, and not just materialistically or career-wise, but also, of course, as a citizen, as in being um, happy with themselves, feeling secure, etc. But the one thing I can do differently to make things better for you is part of that leadership that you can take, whether it's in your family, in your group of friends, but also on a team. And it doesn't mean that you have to be in any kind of managerial position, of course. And the question, what are you learning about yourself and stress? You can ask that of that other person, you can ask that of yourself. And there are many more questions. I have a list of like 30 questions that I think are extremely helpful, but you get the point of it, you get the gist of it. So let's go to part 2. And part 3 is the shortest one, just so that you know. Ways to manage your worries, fears, and stress. I always like to have several plans, several playbooks, so let's go there. I think 4 approaches. They are mostly 3 approaches, but the 4th one is making it teamwork, learning from others, learning from family members, friends, colleagues, but also people that you read articles from. So what is stress management? It's experimenting, it's seizing control, it's taking care of you. And you can do that by mostly 3 approaches, but there are many more, of course, but 3 that I will be sharing with you. It's managing your thinking, number 1. Then to the right, adjusting your habits. To the left, improving self-care. And we know most of the things that we shouldn't do, but are we doing them? That's the question, right? And then again, making it teamwork. So let's get into this. Managing your thinking. So there is a school of thought, it's called cognitive psychology, that says that the basis of our feelings and our decisions and responses and actions is our thoughts and our assumptions. Whether you believe that a thought comes before an emotion or not, it doesn't really even matter. And I don't want to try and convince you of what came first. But I think we can all agree that thoughts and assumptions have a huge effect on how we look at a person, what we focus on in a conversation. So maybe you are surprised by some feedback you're getting from a family member or a boss or a coworker, and your thought about feedback is that it should always be mindful and kind. If that is your assumption about feedback, and the person is being pretty direct and not beating around the bush with you, then that may completely dictate the narrative that you are developing and telling yourself about that interaction and about the feedback. So, 4 steps. I like to look at patterns, whether it's in behavior, whether it's in thoughts, whether it's in emotions, because they may tell us something. So I ask you to look for thought patterns and see if they really make sense, and also whether they are helping you or not. The second one is, can you find real proof for the beliefs that you hold, the assumptions that you have about a person, a situation, what was being said? And can you find proof for your hot thoughts? And by that I mean some really strong interpretations, judgments that you may have. I'm not saying when they're strong, they're right or wrong. I'm just saying, where's the proof? And could you be wrong? And not wrong as in being someone who didn't listen or being someone who didn't get it, but maybe there is another perspective or a different context that you were not considering. Step number 3, identify those thoughts and beliefs and assumptions that are not helping you cope and adjust. So some of us tend to be more Eeyore type thinkers, doom thinkers, than others. Some of us may tend to be much more positive and ignoring the negative, possible negatives, or the real negatives. Neither one of those is better than the other necessarily. It depends on the context, depends on the situation, depends on the team, depends on the family. But what does make a difference is for you to decide which ones of these thought patterns and assumptions that I'm holding are either helping me cope and adjust or not helping me. And it's hard to change around long held assumptions and beliefs. So that is not something that will miraculously change after this webinar or after reading one article about it or doing one exercise around it, but it comes with great practice. And to that point, if you want to read a book that may help you with that, it's called How to Keep People from Pushing My Buttons, and it's by Albert Ellis, Ellis. So the fourth one is to challenge your need for certainty. So the question is, to what extent do we need certainty? And that depends on your context, situation, your personality, how you are being supported. But you can also do a little bit of work on that. Challenge your need for certainty and ask, how much can I be absolutely certain about in life anyway, whether we are in a COVID-19 pandemic or not? And to what extent do I assume bad things will happen just because an outcome is uncertain? What is the likelihood that those bad things will happen? And also try and regain control over those things that you can put in the bucket of certainties, or at least a high likelihood of a certainty. And the best way to regain control is over your own thoughts and your own little actions. So again, I think I mentioned it already. What is one small thing that I can do, not just for you, which was on the question slide earlier, but also for myself? So not for you, the other person, but what is one thing I can do for me right now to regain some sense of control, to relieve my anxiety a little? And there was always one small thing that you can start with. It will never change the whole sentiment. It will never change the whole situation, but it starts with one single step, of course. Questions to dispute irrational or unproductive thoughts. So I would like you to read through these 3 questions quickly. And I am typing in the name and the author of the book. Because that was one question I saw coming up. So the questions to dispute irrational thoughts, unproductive thoughts. The one that I really like is, what if I'm wrong? And I'm lying now, I'm not really liking it, because I hate having to ask myself that question. But it is a good question to ask yourself. What if my narrative doesn't include some context that that doesn't fit me, or that I don't realize about the other person? Also, the simple question, might there be something I'm misinterpreting or overemphasizing or underemphasizing or ignoring? So, and then, do I have enough data to freak out is an interesting one too. This is one from Brene Brown that she shared with me and a lot of other attendees at a conference several years ago in Texas, and I really like that one. So, which thinking habits do you recognize and are unhelpful for you right now, or maybe for that coworker, or maybe for that family member? Go through this list and see which ones you recognize for yourself. So there are categories of unhelpful, and usually I call them irrational thinking patterns. And they're not either necessarily completely good or bad. And don't forget the EO one, the disaster and the doom thinking. Don't judge yourself, don't judge others. If you recognize these, don't use it as, oh, yeah, that's a disaster and a doom thinker. Yeah, that's not helpful. He or she should stop that. That's not what I'm saying, right? It's something that provides context to the person. And it's something that if you have a trusting relationship with that person, you may be able to put out there, right? And usually it's easier to discuss those kind of thinking habits that may not be helpful, whether it is one of your children, another loved one, or a co-worker. It's usually easier to discuss these if we are willing to be vulnerable. Remember what I said about vulnerability, the willingness to show up vulnerable. This is one of the elements where you can practice that. So when it comes to dealing with uncertainty and including those possibly not so helpful thinking patterns, identify your thinking patterns, but also identify your uncertainty triggers. What triggers you into, um, let's say, more anxiety than is needed around uncertainty? So it could be self-generated, it could be real, but even the real ones, we want to manage them. Assuming the worst is one of them, a self-generated one, but also exaggerating or underestimating the severity of outcomes. So ask yourself, what are some uncertainty triggers that you may just want to share with someone else and get their perspective on, and maybe want to curb? Also, identify your physical and behavioral warning signs for uncertainty, stress, anxiety, etc. And the most known ones are tensions in the neck and the shoulders, but others could be overeating, undereating, a changed sleeping pattern. It could be maybe stomach aches or headaches, but there are also these behavioral warning signs. So maybe nagging is a warning sign, at least for people around you, that your stress and anxiety from the uncertainty is increasing, but you may not have that level of awareness. So if you don't hear yourself complain or nag or micromanage, if you don't hear it, if you don't notice it, if you're not aware, then it becomes very hard to acknowledge it and to make a change, right? So I hope you feel comfortable to invite family members and certain trusted colleagues to provide you with that feedback that helps you become more aware and identify them more. So allow yourself to feel the uncertainty. So again, it's not meant to judge yourself, condemn yourself, and tell yourself, oh gosh, I'm doing this wrong again. Or, gee, what an unhelpful thinking pattern. Still haven't gotten rid of it. And it's also not about comparing with others. Others may be better at dealing with uncertainty and change, or appear to be better, and maybe they're not. But that's not what it's about. It's becoming your best dealer with uncertainty, change, and stress. And so, for all of us who sometimes want to help others with things that we know that work well, that can be helpful, but it starts with accepting that someone is where they is, but also asking others to accept that we are where we are, right? And that's that moving away from comparing with others. And then focusing on the present, in the here and now, which can be hard if you're, sheltering at home and it's too crowded, it's too noisy, you have to be too creative, etc. And you basically just miss all the freedoms that we took for granted and collaborating in person with people. Or you're just extremely worried about the future, about the job that you just lost or that you fear you're going to lose, or the payments that you don't know how to make May 1, which is tomorrow, or whatever it is that is worrying you. And they can be, of course, real, true worries. It could be your health or a loved one who is ill. Yet, also focus on the present moment, right here, right now. Curb the regretting the past. That is really not helping because it's not changing the past, but also curb the ruminating about the future. So what some people do when they want to deal with anxiety in a different way is, my clients and I talk about that quite a bit. It's they set aside a certain time to, and we don't want to call it ruminate, of course, right? But they set aside a certain time to be thinking of things that worry them, and some very strong messages that you can have for others that are dealing with anxiety. And this is kind of going into the third section, but allow me, that is, messages like, I care about you. I know you're capable. I hear what you're saying. I'd like to know how I can best support you. Those are really good phrases to help others focus on the present, but also yourself, of course. So, adjusting your habits. I think the first one we already mentioned, accepting emotions as is, not as in we're not going to change it or we are doomed, but it is what it is right now. And how can I make one change to minimize it, to dial it from a 7 to a 6 or a 5? Or if it is a positive emotion that you want to feel more of, how can I dial it up? The second one, I'm even not going to read out loud because you've heard it so many times. Then reframing a situation. Reframing can be so helpful, using a different narrative, a little bit of a different context. I regularly ask business friends, how would you reframe such and such situation, whether it is an organizational challenge I'm dealing with or a leadership challenge of a client, which I'm, of course, won't mention by name then, or whether it is a personal situation, and then focus on more on what's possible and positive than only on what's not possible and what's negative. So positive psychology doesn't tell you to ignore everything that is worrying you and to ignore the fact that we're in very uncharted waters with a lot of concerns now and in the future, but please also look at what is positive and possible. So number 4, with the opportunities, and then keep making the adjustments. And in some situations, all you can control is your attitude and your emotional response, of course. So Viktor Frankl said, once we cannot change a situation, we are forced to change ourselves and our attitude. He was a Austrian psychiatrist whom I highly regard. So, when it comes to habits, ask yourself now in this situation, and this is a fluid situation, we're transitioning back into something different again in many different states. But maybe if you think of an organizational situation that you're in, what are some habits that maybe used to work in the past, but not right now or not moving forward? And what are some habits that will still work moving forward? So what to keep and what to shed. So when it comes to working from home in a very limited or crowded or noisy situation, some people keep getting dressed for work. I'm one of those people. I get dressed as if I go out. I put on my perfume. That works for me. May not work for you, but what are some of the things that help you remain sane, feel professional, or feel like a good parent or partner, whatever it is? And of course, planning and prioritizing is always important, no less so now. Which are the habits that are working against me? Which ones do you want to shed? Reflect yourself, but also ask other people that you trust because they may help you with some of those blind spots. And which new habits and agreements with either co-workers or with family members do you want to align on, implement? Do you want to change? So sometimes even the simple statement out loud, I am signing off for the workday right now, at the end of your day, even though you didn't leave the home, but your workday is over. That could be a new habit, saying that out loud once or twice, that helps you make that transition. And so when it comes to improving self-care, that was the last one. And then the teamwork is, I've included that in all of it. Make a teamwork, discuss it with friends and family and colleagues. But I will show you the 7 habits of, of highly resilient people from the Resilience Center in Montana. And I encourage you to go look up that website or maybe the Penn Resilience Program of Penn State University. They are great resources. Think about moving, mini relaxations, and we know it all. We know it all, but we don't do it enough, or many of us don't do it enough. If you do, I applaud you, and I would like to learn how you do enough of all this. One thing, the gratitude journal, write down right before you go to bed 3 specific things that you're grateful for. Research at the Mayo Clinic and many other places have shown that it has many mental and psychological and physical benefits, huge benefits, but you have to write it down manually, 3 specific things, and every single evening or night. So I would like you to also look at other resources like the American Psychological Association. And why do you see something here that is from 2017, not 1917? It's just to remind you that these things are not new. They still apply in the present circumstances. And so make sure that you also look for COVID-19 specific resources, but also don't forget to do and solicit the things that we already know that we can do. So with that, some positive news sites, but I will leave these for you. You can look these up if you want to. So part 3, helping others manage their stress. Real simple, we've talked about it, but it's not easy. Stepping into the person's shoes, normalizing talking about things, asking better questions, dialing down that judging and advising, even though it's well meant. Be vulnerable first and share and reframe. So this is really a summary of what we said before. And slow down. The turtle is to remind you to slow down. And I think patience and reframing from judgment are the best gifts that we can give ourselves, but also to others. So when it comes to helping others, I'd like you to remind yourself to observe, and then instead of judge or evaluate or interpret, just wonder a little longer. Trust that you will have some good questions to ask and that the person will probably take those that are helpful. Support them, but simply by asking, how can I best support you? And find ways to empower them. So this is more a coaching perspective than a advising perspective, right? And I think that's what most people fare best under. So, just a couple of last things. Working from a crowded home when the children cannot go outside and get dirty in the mud. You see here a couple of suggestions. I don't think there is much new, but please remember that good lists, sharing them, making agreements, sticking to them, being gracious if someone doesn't stick to them, and that someone may also be you. And then also adopting or agreeing on a cramped shelter at home mindset. That's how I'd like to call it. A couple of my clients really liked it and have put that up in their living rooms where they are co-living with too many people and trying to work and do homeschooling with too many people. And again, this is just my idea about a good cramped at home situation, but you may have different ones, right? I think pick the battles wisely and let some things go should be on everyone's list, if I may be a little prescriptive at the end of this presentation. So, proximity affects working culture. The danger is that you and I revert back to our personal communication style with less consideration for others because we don't see others that well through video conferencing. You may not even always have your video on, so remain mindful of different styles. So these are again a couple of questions to up your mindfulness, questions you can ask your co-workers. And if you change them a little bit, you can also ask people at home that you have to work with. But asking a lot of good questions about what is working for you, what would you like to see from me, what are your preferences is really helpful. So with that, some resources, I've mentioned a couple already. These are some additional resources. And please know that Harvard Business Review has made all their articles free of charge that are COVID-19 related, and they take that pretty broadly. So anything stress, change related, uncertainty related. And I'm just mentioning 3 examples here, but there are so many more. And so with that, I would like to end with, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Easier said than done, but I appreciate and thank Viktor Frankl for that beautiful reminder.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for your words of wisdom, especially on this topic and during this time. We will have about 5 minutes for question and answering. So I just want to turn it over for the first question. The first question refers to when you were talking about the brain and the negative effects stress has on it. So one of the listeners asks, when the cortex is resized after the stressor passes, is it permanently shrunken from that point on, or can it, I guess, enlarge again after that stress is over?
Yeah, excellent question. And it reminds me always to be careful with those words, right? So I thank the participant for that question. Um, a lot of what we know about brain function and brain's regeneration is still changing. But what we do know, extreme and prolonged stress may permanently change the quality of brain parts, the size of brain parts. But now I'm talking about extreme and very prolonged stress for a person who doesn't have the um, um, factors or context of a great support system, maybe, or in some areas in their lives things are going well. So it really depends on the specific circumstances and context of the person, and it has to be extremely prolonged and extremely severe stress for it to be permanent. And maybe even in a couple of years from now we will have proof that for no one it will be permanent, but for the vast majority of people it will not be permanent.
That's great to hear. Thank you for answering that.
Mhm.
Our next question is more about listeners feeling either guilt or working through the relationships with their families. So it's kind of a two-parter of if you have any tools suggested to help loved ones understand us better, and
Mhm.
also any suggestions for feeling at capacity for listening to others during this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Oh, another excellent question. You know, much of this starts with being open and honest about how things are impacting you and how hard or not necessarily hard, but what you're doing to make it work for yourself and everyone, while you also realize that you are fallible. So I don't know where the guilt question exactly comes from, but it immediately triggered thoughts and memories for myself of situations where I felt under some sort of stress and didn't show up as the great mom that I want to be, or the great partner that I want to be, or the great colleague or coach. And generally it's more in personal circumstances that I've felt that. And many of my clients who deal with anxieties and maybe even some lenience towards perfectionism have brought this to my attention too. And so, again, I think it starts with being honest about what's going on for you, what you aspire, and how you know that you don't always reach that aspiration, and literally asking some grace of the other person. When it comes to listening and feeling that you don't have a capacity to listen as well as you would like to, also please be assertive and let someone know when it's not a good time to listen. So what I've done in the past, when we had 3 young children and an adult nephew living with us, and I was starting my own business for the first time in the Netherlands, I told our kids, but also the 19-year-old, that I really love to listen to your story. And since it's not an emergency or a problem that needs to be solved now, I want to feel more, more present. I want to feel more rested, or I want to feel less distracted by the work that I'm right now doing. So I'd love to talk. I'd love to listen at 4 o'clock this afternoon, or whatever it is. So being assertive and saying no, but not declining to listen, but more scheduling it at a time when you think and hope you will be better equipped and maybe feel a little more rested, or a little less distracted or stressed, if that makes sense. And I hope I'm getting the right tone here, or the right context for the question.
Yeah, I believe you definitely are. And yeah, I think that goes along with what a lot of the listeners were looking to hear or hoping to
Mhm.
hear about. I'll just ask one more question that hopefully answers a lot of the other questions.
Mhm.
There have been a lot of great questions from listeners today, and one of them was just about if you have a podcast or something where they can hear from you or listen to you a little bit more, because I think a lot of people have really enjoyed what you've told us today.
Oh, that is very kind, and I'm glad to be catering to some needs. So that's awesome to hear because I was so honored and excited to serve your clients and your listeners. So thank you for that. And I have a website. It's called Heart Talk Biz Coaching. A couple of tapings are on there. Soon there will be more and shorter ones. And it contains many blog posts. They're generally brief, generally practical, so they don't take a lot of time to read. And it's a little dangerous with the amount of people that had signed up for this webinar, but feel free to reach out to me to just get some additional resources complimentary. I'd be happy to share. I'd be happy to be in this with you together. And of course, I will never use your email address for any other purpose than responding to your question or request for a resource. I'd be extremely happy to do that.
Oh, thank you so much, Caroline. That really means a lot. We definitely appreciate that. And I'll just move on again. So thank you so much for your time and your incredible information. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending a link to the webinar recording in a couple of days. So you'll also receive a slide deck recording, and you'll also be able to find our next webinar within this series, Adapt and Thrive in Changing Times. You can visit our website to register for this upcoming webinar. So thank you all again. You'll receive a recording of this webinar, and I just hope you have a wonderful day. Take care and stay safe.
Yes, thank you again.